So I'm very, very pleased to introduce to you Dr. Marieke Begeman, who works at the University Medical Center in Groningen in the Netherlands. And she's going to talk to us about a large Dutch study which of people on with the first episode of psychosis who have been in an open label RCT have been asked to either use medication for a year or stop the medication after 3 months, and then to see how they feel after that and whether they improve at the same rate. So without further ado, please welcome Marieke Begeman.
Hi everyone, I'm Marieke Begeman. I work at the University Medical Center Groningen in the Netherlands, and I'm trial manager for the HAMLETT study that is ongoing at this moment. And it's an honor for me to talk to you about the topic of to continue or not to continue antipsychotic medication use after remission of a first psychotic episode. If we talk about antipsychotic medication, we often refer to its ability in preventing relapse. If you look at a meta-analysis by Stefan Lucht, for example, he compared the percentages of relapse in patients that had discontinued their medication versus those who had continued taking their medication. And relapse is much higher in the first year after remission in the discontinuing patients versus those who continue to take their medication. And same goes for those who do that after their first year of remission. However, if we talk to patients, we know that they often want to stop taking their medication because of the side effects, which include increased appetite, decreased motivation, impotence, dysphoria, and dyskinesia, for example. So if we not only want to look at relapse, we can look at functional outcome. And one of the first studies to actually look at this is the Dutch Macyfos study by Lex Runderink. It was an open label study conducted a couple of years ago, including 128 first episode patients who were maximum of 6 months in remission. And they were randomized one-on-one to either continue their medication or to discontinue their medication at an early stage. And what they found was actually not that surprising in terms of relapse, because the rates were much higher in the early discontinuation group. However, they did not find any differences between the two groups when they looked at functional outcome. However, when they looked at long-term functioning, they were quite unique because they followed the patients for at least 7 years. They did lose contact with 20% of the patients, but for those remaining participants, they again compared participants in the original continuation group to the original discontinuation group. In terms of relapse, they found no differences between these two groups, so risk of relapse was equal. But a very important difference was visible for functional remission, which appeared to be much higher in the patients who discontinued their medication at an early stage than those who had continued taking their medication. So this was indeed a quite surprising finding. And it was a study with big impact across the world, I can say. And even though none of the guidelines at this moment actively recommends early discontinuation, many psychiatrists, many Dutch psychiatrists do reduce antipsychotics at an early stage. But we are still a bit on thin ice because this is the only result. However, a couple of years ago, when we were starting the HAMLETT study, the Hong Kong study by Hui and colleagues came out. And they also had a 2-year study, but now with a 10-year follow-up period. They included 178 first episode patients who were also randomized one-on-one to continue or to discontinue their medication. And what they found was quite the old picture, of a worsened clinical status after 10 years in those who had discontinued their medication at an early stage, which was much higher than the continuation group. Also, suicide rate was twice as high in the early discontinuation group, and functioning was equal. So, the question to continue or not to continue is still to be answered. And for how long should we take these antipsychotics? There was a large register-based study by T. Hone, published in 2018, and they had observational data of like 20 years follow-up time. And when they looked at the risk for rehospitalization or death, the risk with continued use of antipsychotic medication was the lowest, followed by not using any antipsychotic medication. And after that, the longer you use, the more difficult it is to stop because of the increased risk for rehospitalization or death. So this is quite a difficult picture to take in. We were inspired by the question to continue or not to continue. So we started the HAMLETT study in 2017. And this is an acronym for Handling Antipsychotic Medication, Long-Term Evaluation of Targeted Treatment. And our main goal was to replicate the Wundering finding. We conducted a nationwide study with much more participants, over 500, patients who are 3 to 6 months in remission of their first psychotic episode. And in order to recruit these, we worked together with 26 mental health institutions. And although the question sounds easy to continue or not to continue, the questions are much more complicated in real life. What we want to find out is what are the long-term effects of continuing versus discontinuing antipsychotic medication, and not so much comparing two groups, but finding out how we can predict who can actually reduce early and which patients need to continue. And can we predict relapse, for example? Our methodology is described in detail in trials. We published that last year. And we have a couple of work packages. And in the first, that is actually the trial design, continue versus discontinuing. And this is led by Professor Iris Sommer. In work package 2, Professor Wim Veling and Jim van Os look at experience sampling to see whether they can find early predictors of successful discontinuation. And part of our patients download an app on their smartphone, and they get prompted a couple of times a day to fill in how they are feeling at that moment. So quite a cool technique. And in work package 3, led by Professor Philip Smith, we evaluate the cost effectiveness and prognostic modeling to see, for example, what are the costs, the healthcare costs associated with continuation versus early discontinuation. Work package 4 is led by Martijn Gikkert, and they look at implementation. So what we do is discuss options how to implement our results that are to be expected in a couple of years in a quick and fast way in clinical practice, because that is what we want to do in the end with our trial results. Work package 5 concerns blood markers. This is headed by Dr. Nico van Beveren, and we, for example, look at genetic risk profiles. The study protocol is quite extensive, but in short, we have 2 phases. First, we screen participants, and if they can actually participate in the study, they get randomized one-on-one to the continue group who continue to take their antipsychotic medication. A maximum dose reduction of 25% is allowed to stay in that group. And the other half is randomized to the discontinued group. And those patients have gradual dose reduction or perhaps complete discontinuation of their antipsychotic medication. In the first phase, we see patients every 3 months, and that is followed by phase 2, where we have a follow-up period of 4 years, and we see them yearly. This is way too detailed to discuss everything, but as you can see, we have a lot of measurement instruments to look at all types of outcome measures. For example, personal and social functioning, which is determined by the BODAS, and level of functioning, psychotic symptoms measured by the PANS, movement disorders, clinical variables, medication use, physical examinations, cognition, blood samples. We have that evaluated almost every visit. It was quite a challenge because to write it down in a study protocol is quite something else than actually conducting a study and finding more than 500 participants. So that is the reason why we work together with all these mental health institutions across the Netherlands. Within every mental health institution, we have one principal investigator. This is often a psychiatrist who is responsible for the HAMLETT study within his or her institution. And we invented a new term, namely not a PI, but a DI, which stands for dedicated includer. And this can be a nurse, a case manager, or also a psychiatrist who actually screens patients to see whether they are eligible to participate. And there is a unique concept for the HAMLETT study that we actually pay these individuals to actually give them time to screen, because the mental health care at the moment in the Netherlands has a lot of pressure with many patients, waiting lists, and very little time to spend on research purposes. So that is why we actually pay our dedicated includers to dedicate their time to find patients for us. This is what we call our family, because we work together with all these institutions and all these individuals there, the PIs, the DIs. And if I give this presentation in the Netherlands, I often see people looking at the family tree, like, do I recognize someone from my institution? And this family tree changes constantly because we get sometimes new DIs, new PIs, and it still remains a very connected family. So we're very proud of this. So how do we stay connected? This is also quite a challenge. What we do is with every institute, we get in touch once every 2 weeks, mostly via telephone call or a video call. And we also visit them. We organize principal investigator meetings to discuss how can recruitment be improved, how is the HAMLETT study going for you. Then we organize DI meetings where our dedicated includers share their experiences, because as the HAMLETT team, we can think about ways to inform patients and to get them to participate. But this differs per patient and also per institution, how and when you can best contact them. Then we have patient meetings. We think it is important to discuss the topic of antipsychotic medication use very broadly. So we organize free meetings where participants, but also other patients, their relatives, their friends, but also treating physicians are welcome to participate in. And we discuss the topic. We invite keynote speakers and experienced experts, and provide a platform for people to get in touch when they want to talk about tapering off their medication or continuing their medication. Of course, due to the COVID-19 restrictions, it was very difficult to organize these meetings for the past 1.5 years. So what we did was organizing online meetings, which was a challenge, but it was also a lot of fun. And it was actually, for all these busy schedules, sometimes even a better solution to speak to each other a bit more frequently, to get together. So this is a print screen of our last video call. So the question of discontinuing or continuing antipsychotic medication. To find an answer to this question, the pressure has been felt worldwide, and several trials have been initiated during a couple of last years. One trial is actually in Australia, the REDUCE trial, and also the RADAR study in England. Then we have the Denmark study, which is called Taylor, and of course HAMLETT. And at this moment, all other three studies have stopped recruiting. The RADAR study could not include their full sample, but has included a lot of participants. They actually not only look at first episode psychosis, but also people who are more chronically ill. And their results are to be expected next coming period. We're looking forward to that. The Taylor study and the REDUCE trial did include first episode patients only, and it was so difficult to get these patients to participate that both studies had to end early due to under recruitment. So the pressure for the HAMLETT study is also being felt because we are still ongoing and hope to get to our targets, but it is very difficult. It is nice that we actually collaborate with these other studies. We had a joint symposium last year in the Netherlands. The other studies joined via video call, and we've also written a paper on discontinuation of antipsychotic medication, and that it's maybe time to rethink trial design because it was so difficult and still is for us to recruit patients who actually want to be in the study. So how are we doing at the moment then? So when we first included our patient in September 2017, you can see that our planning was a bit more optimistic than reality. So the lighter blue line on top is a bit more steep than our darker blue line of the actual number of patients, but we were including quite steadily. And then there was a bit of a lower point, which was actually caused by the COVID-19 restrictions. This is our Prime Minister wearing a mouth mask. And of course, due to COVID, it was even more difficult for us to actually recruit patients. Institutions were struggling, waiting lists were increasing, and we could not easily inform patients, and they could not easily travel to our study centers. So we struggled, to say the least, and it cost us about 40% of our original inclusion numbers. But I'm proud to say that at this moment we have 341 participants in the HAMLETT study, and we are actually at this moment at 2/3 of our inclusion. So we are doing okay. We are reaching our milestones. The first participant, of course, in 2017, and then 20% and also 50% of our participants. But in September 2021, we hoped to have 80% of our participants included, and we are now at 66. So we have more to go. So we also experienced some delay in recruitment. So we were actually intrigued because our big inspirator, HAMLETT, was also quarantined himself during the plague in his house in Verona. And for him, it was actually not so much a period of setback, but actually a period of great productivity. And we also try to be inspired by that. So if we look at the HAMLETT visits, of course, we wanted to continue them as best as possible via video calls. And because of our participants, they are quite young, they were okay with that. They found it very doable. But of course, we do miss our face-to-face measurements. So for example, blood samples or cognitive measurements, we cannot do that when we are having a video call. And also, as I said, recruitment is difficult. So we make the best of it, but still. I do have some interim results because it costs us extra time to change all the visits from face-to-face to digital, but it also saves us some travel time, of course. So we also hoped to be very productive in this COVID time. So what we did is also a safety analysis, for example, and we looked at the continue versus the discontinue group in terms of hospitalization. And the numbers were actually quite comparable. If you look at psychotic symptoms, this was actually a bit higher, namely in 22% of the continue group versus the discontinue group, which had 15 participants. And for other symptomatology and for physical condition, it was 3 and 4 in the continue group and 5 and 1 in the discontinue group. For the suicide attempts, there was 1 in each group. And if you look at patients who unfortunately died during the study, this was 2 in the discontinued group, 1 because of a suicide, and 1 reason was confidential. This was another reason for us to terminate the study. So in terms of safety, both groups are doing okay. One interesting factor is crossovers. We are a pragmatic trial, and we see that many patients have a strong preference for one of the 2 groups. And because we find it very interesting how people are doing anyway, we allow them to remain in the study, even if they do not want to adhere to the randomization result. So, for example, we see that many patients have a preference for discontinuation. If they get randomized to the continuation group, we still urge them to stay on their medication dose as best as possible. But if they do decide to gradually reduce, we hope they do it as slowly as possible, and we still follow them in the study, and we label them as a crossover. And what we see is that 3 months post-baseline, and 20% of people in the continue group can be labeled as actually following the discontinue regime. And we also have it the other way around. So we have 10% of the people in the discontinue group who actually continue to take their medication. After 6 months, the rates are 18% versus 9%. Then we have written an article from the work package of implementation, which is headed by Martijn Kikkert. And I'm proud to present some of the results to you. The study was published actually just now. So you can find it. It's open access in early intervention in psychiatry. And what Martijn did is interview 50 psychiatrists in the Netherlands, half male, half female. Their mean age was around 50 years, and their work experience was a mean of 15 years. And all participants had more than 1 year experience with FEP treatment, and 82% had experience with that for more than 6 years. And what we try to find out is how are they treating the patients at this moment. So if you look at the strategies they implement after achieved remission, what happens when the clinical symptoms have faded away? So the question was formulated as follows for the psychiatrists. Your client has responded to the medication and is in remission. Any mild positive symptoms that are still present do not influence daily functioning. So for which percentage of your patients do you use the following strategies? So people had to fill in percentages. A, I continue the antipsychotic dosage that led to remission for at least 1 year, which is actually the guideline in the Netherlands. And then option B, I reduce dosage. Option C, I phase the medication out to 0. Or D, I follow an alternative strategy. What we found is that for 50% of the patients, the dosage is being continued. So that is about half. But in 1/3 of the patients, dose reduction is actually started with a mean of 4 months after remission. So that is way earlier than the guidelines recommend. And for 1 in 10 patients, almost 10%, they discontinue to a full stop. And that is started also with a mean of 4.5 months after remission. So this was an interesting picture of the clinical practice in the Netherlands by psychiatrists. So how is this picture after 12 months after achieved remission? So the question was, your client has been in stable remission for 12 months. Any mild positive symptoms do not influence daily functioning. So in this situation, for which percentage of your patients do you use the following strategies? Again, with the same answer options. I continue antipsychotic dosage, I reduce dosage, I phase the medication out to full stop, or I follow an alternative strategy. And now the numbers are a bit different. So it's not 50%, but it is 33% that continues the antipsychotic medication after 12 months of remission. Again, 1/3 tries to reduce dosage, and 30% of patients get offered to discontinue their medication to a full stop. The mean when it was reduced to 0 was in 14 weeks. So as I started this talk, we knew already that psychiatrists in the Netherlands, that many discontinue medication in their patients already in an early phase. And this investigation also found that in 50% of the patients, this is actually the case. So quite high numbers, because this is against the guidelines. The other findings were that what if a patient prefers to discontinue medication early against your advice? Then clinicians reported that they nonetheless went along with dose reduction with an attempt to stop in almost 60% of cases. So the opinion of the patient is very much taken into account in that case, even if it's against the advice of the clinician. Which warning signs do you take into account to advise a dose increase? And clinicians then responded that when the patient has a relapse, that they advise a dose increase in 95% of cases. An increase in positive symptoms, then it is 56%. And when it concerns a deterioration of social functioning, almost half of the clinician would advise a dose increase. But if you look at more subtle warning signs, for example, agitation, sleeping problems, restlessness, emotional instability, and anxiety, clinicians say, well, I do consider them as a warning sign, but I wouldn't advise dose increase unless they are accompanied by other warning signs. And that is the case between 70 and 50%. Some other results from our PhD student, that is Priscilla Oman. She looked at cognition, and she actually used cluster analysis methods to see whether we could find subgroups of cognitive functioning in our patients and link that to long-term functioning. And her results are quite interesting and being presented during the SEARS conference last year. Her article has been accepted in Psychological Medicine. So you can read all about that soon. So our team is very busy with publishing results, even though we have not yet fully completed recruitment. So we did our best to use the COVID times to our advantage. So to be continued, and not only in terms of recruitment and in terms of producing research articles, of course, but we know that the first 10 years after a first psychosis are crucial. And HAMLETT follows people for 4 years. And we have such a unique cohort that we would like to prolong this period with another 6 years. So we have written a grant application and we succeeded in receiving the money. So we have now a new companion for our HAMLETT, which is Ophelia. And the Ophelia study stands for Outcome of Psychosis, Heterogeneity Explained by Long-Lasting Individual Attributes. So with Ophelia, we can follow our participants up till 10 years after their first psychotic episode. And we also do data enrichment. So we make extra measurements such as personal recovery and gene-environment interactions. So if you look at this, in total, the research logic behind HAMLETT and Ophelia is that HAMLETT is 4 years, looks at patient features and treatment. And in Ophelia, we add 6 more years to that. And we evaluate genetics, the social exposome, and all that to target recovery, personal and social functioning, and remission. And we use, for example, qualitative in-depth interviews regarding existential recovery. We look at gene-environment interaction for personalized care, and we do prognostic modeling for proactive care and shared decision-making. So this is the big plan we have behind HAMLETT and Ophelia. And what will these studies hopefully bring you the next coming years? Well, that is that we collect data and hope to analyze data on individual prognosis instead of group prognosis. And that we can provide tools to calculate the risk of relapse and deterioration versus stable remission and functional recovery. So all this in the end to personalize proactive psychosis care. So this is the big picture of HAMLETT and Ophelia. And our to-do list is long. We have to analyze data. We have to face the impact of COVID-19. We have to complete our face-to-face measurements, for example, and make up for our missed inclusions. And we continue to organize national and international meetups, hopefully in real life again. And of course, we do have these digital meetings that seem to be endless. So this is a picture of our bi-weekly meeting that is with our collaborators across the Netherlands, and everyone tunes in bi-weekly on a Wednesday. So I would like to thank our participants and collaborators because without them, no HAMLETT or Ophelia. And we have a website, unfortunately, mostly in Dutch, but you can find an information clip and see what we are doing and what we are publishing at the moment. This is my email address. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, of course. And to finalize, I always have this slide, which I proudly present because it contains all the logos from all the different institutions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Marieke, for the wonderful talk. There are quite a few questions, and I'm going to abuse my role as chair and ask you the first one myself. If you were, you mentioned a number of times that there have been difficulties in recruiting, and that looking back, you might want to change maybe the design for future trials. Could you give us some ideas of what kind of changes you would recommend?
Yes, thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me to talk today.
If we think about trial design, I think that the majority of our difficulties in recruitment was the specific population that we include. So first episode, psychosis, and also people who are in remission 3 to 6 months. So that is a very specific time window of only 3 months that we can include. So I would think that if we may include people who are a bit shorter in remission or a bit longer in remission, then it would be a more feasible study to conduct.
Okay, thank you. And there is a question which links up to this one, and that is, what do you think are the reasons why recruitment is so difficult? So you already mentioned the time window. Is it maybe because the preference of the service user overrides the being randomized in a group? Is that been an issue?
Well, if you think about it, it is quite a thing to leave up your medication use to a computer that randomizes you to continuation or discontinuation. So it is something that we talk about, of course, with our patients. But because we have a pragmatic study design, we can still include people even though they do not follow the condition. So these are the crossovers that I also showed you in my slide. And it's actually not that bad as we would have expected. But I think that in the Netherlands, we are quite optimistic maybe in prescribing antipsychotics. So the dosage is already quite low generally. And people also reduce already a little bit, as we found in our questionnaire published by Martijn Kikkert. So that is also a difficulty that many people that we would like to recruit already have reduced their antipsychotic medication use. So they can no longer participate in our study because they cannot no longer be randomized.
Okay, so thank you. A slightly different question. Did you track other psychiatric medication aside from the antipsychotic?
Yes, what we do, we try to collect 3 sources of information. The first one is from patients. So we ask them to fill in a questionnaire each time that they visit us or we visit them. And the second source are our dedicated includers. And we can ask them if we see certain things that we notice, and we can check with them whether it's actually correct. And we can also check with them how the discontinuation is going. And a third source is that from the pharmacies in the Netherlands, we have a very large database of which medication is being handed out to the patient. So the medication that is actually being collected at the desk. And we ask for a list for all our participants every once in a while to see what is actually being handed out to them. So by combining these 3 sources, we hope to get a good feeling of the type of medication that they use. And it includes antipsychotic medication, but also other psychiatric medication and medication in general. So it's quite a rich database.
Thank you. The next one is, what is your hypothesis about Workpackage 2? What are you expecting to find as early predictors of successful discontinuation?
Yes, I think that is a very good question, as in we need to do more research because we have no clue at this moment. But if I may guess, I think it is important to look at, for example, duration of untreated psychosis. We also take that into account. We also know that if you look at discontinuation, that it relies heavily on the rate of discontinuation. So actually the last percentage of dosage need to be very, very, very slowly tapered off. So I think the way in which medication is being discontinued can be very helpful to predict success. Maybe also the level of functioning before onset of psychosis. Genetics is something that we take a look at. Childhood trauma is a specific topic of interest to me. So all this data will be evaluated to make a good prediction.
Okay, thank you. So the next person says, thank you for a very interesting talk. Do you think consenting to randomization biases outcome in any way? So whether randomization, you covered this already a little bit, but whether it biases outcome in any way, will recovery be different from a naturalistic sample? And this the question was asked by Richard Whale.
Yes, well, that's very interesting because if you look at research already, the patients that participate in such a design are already a bit biased, who actually want to participate in science, of course. I think that, as I said before, our participants they have questions about why they need to be randomized and also have objections against it. But if you look at whether this actually leads to non-participation, this is quite okay. I don't know, maybe people are a bit more open-minded than if we would not have that design of randomization. But yeah, it's interesting to look at that. And this is also the reason why we register the reasons why people will not participate. So all the people that are screened, they also indicate why they do not want to participate, and we note all those reasons. And there's actually now a paper being written about that, about our screening numbers between 2017 and 2020. So we can make a sort of, we can get a better picture of what is happening and which people are not in the sample.
Okay. The next question is from Maria Loconsolo. Is there a particular measure you use to determine if someone is in remission? You might have mentioned this, but...
Yes, well, this is a topic of much debate, and it depends, of course, very much on your definition, how you look at remission. And we often rely on the PANSS measurement. And if the PANSS is not being used in an institution, of course, we do the screening ourselves. So that is our most important way of looking at remission. So, but there are different definitions across the different studies. So I think that is also good to take into account. What is remission?
Yeah, you also mentioned in one of your slides that you were looking at social functioning, especially the longitudinal studies that went on for a bit longer.
Yeah, so for the screening, it is remission of psychotic symptoms, and that is the PANSS. And that is the most often used measure. But for our long-term evaluation, we look at functioning in the social regard. And also we have a specific work package now that also looks at personal recovery, because recovery can vary between patients, what it means to you. Does it mean that you want to live together with a meaningful partner and have kids and have a job? Or is it okay for you to live alone and to walk your dog every day and be very happy with that? So recovery also differs between people.
Thank you. There's one last question because of time. So again, you might have answered it a little bit already, but just to make sure we don't miss out on any answers that you might want to add. Again, thank you for the talk. I wanted to ask you about your thoughts about how the rise of shared decision-making in treatment might impact recruitment or retention in studies like this, particularly when people might be randomized to a group that is not their first choice.
Yeah, well, this is a discussion that we keep on having within the team. Of course, if you look at randomization, this is not has nothing to do with shared decision making in that sense, because the computer says what you are going to do. The only thing that is shared decision tapering off. I think my connection was lost for a blips.
Yeah, but you are back now.
Okay, cool. Good. So when people
oh, I'm afraid we have some difficulties. Marika, you keep coming and going. So it might be... It might be easier if you answer that in writing rather than, because otherwise you cut out. But thank you very much again for your excellent talk, and it generated, as you can see, a lot of questions. So, and again, remember, just to remind everybody that Marika is happy to take questions, and she provided her email address as well if you want to reach out to her. Before we move on to the break, I just wanted to remind you that the next session will be in room 2. So you need to, go back to the menu and choose room 2. We have a 5 minutes break, a little bit longer actually, 6 minutes break. Grab a coffee, move a little bit, refresh yourself. And don't forget that you can navigate to the sponsor booth as well as to the other participants. And I just want to remind everybody that there are still a few places, not many, for the workshop on after the conference is over. We have a post-conference workshop where Nev Jones and other people with lived experience, who are also researchers, are going to talk about the lived experience involvement in early intervention. So I'd encourage you, if you are interested in this topic, to register as soon as possible. Thanks again, Marike, and thank you all for your attention, and we'll see you shortly.